If you put this in a historical context and you think about just the changes that have occurred since the mid-1990s when the internet became accessible and available to most of us, they've been quite profound for most of us throughout our lives. And the argument that McKinsey's put forward is that we're about to see this machine-to-machine Internet of Things age dawn on us, and that's going to have even more profound impacts, and particularly on those of us that are in professional services and working in industry, whereas the previous 20 years have been more about social media, more about e-commerce, more about accessing information over the web, and largely industries remain, I would say, not that affected by these changes, but I think we're about to see that change. Big data is a very fashionable term at the moment, but not many people actually understand. There's a good reason for that. It's actually very hard to come to terms with, and it's very hard to work out what they want to do. You'll often hear people say, I want big data, I want analytics, with no idea about what they actually want. And I think part of our job is to help our customers think that through. So I just wanted to bring yet another topical example. How many of you have actually seen this or any reference to this? So you might be aware that as part of Donald Trump's campaign, they did 5,000 data points on every American adult. That's almost 300 million people, plus 500,000 psychometric surveys. And this article attributes his success to the analysis of that big data and specifically targeting in those states that he required to win in order to win the presidency. So I thought that kind of an interesting article. So if you're wondering about the power of big data, I think this is an example of what we're about to see. This is another buzzword. We hear a lot about analytics at the moment. And so really it's simply about how we analyse data and make better decisions out of data. Now we have the subject matter expertise to apply to that. So cost reduction is usually one of the things that people talk about when you hear about analytics. You hear about faster, better decision making, and you hear about new products and services. And there's kind of a I know how many of you have seen this book, Competing on Analytics, which I've just been reading, and it's kind of a very interesting insight into how you use analytics to build a better business, to make more money out of what you're doing. And where do we add value? So analysing big data requires subject matter expertise. So I would argue there's really nothing new. We're applying our expertise in a slightly different way to how we normally do. We're applying it to data, but it's still leveraging the core expertise that we have. The work we've done with transport, where we're monitoring in real time traffic on Vic Roads freeways around Melbourne. We're monitoring that using Bluetooth and radar. We're collecting that data in real time. We're then putting that into a big data platform, and Vic Roads are doing analytics to work out what the traffic's actually doing in Melbourne. Ultimately, that'll get fed back into the system and advise motorists of pinpoint accurate travel times to their destinations, and that'll be available through social media. It's currently available on variable message signs on the side of the road.
But I think also what we're finding is that customers are looking to us, and we work very closely with Henry and his team on that, on how to actually analyse and interpret that data in a meaningful way. So a good example I'll provide is we work with a commercial rail freight company who had all the data coming out of their locomotives to say, the temperature, the pressure loads, the fuel consumption, the acceleration, etc. But they didn't know what to do with it, and what they wanted to do was become more efficient on the track. So instead of kind of saying, well, the computer says you can get better to the drivers, which the drivers turn around and say, well, the computer's never driven a train, we actually got the drivers to compete with each other. So we actually took those data sets and said, Henry's absolutely nailed this run, and here is kind of his image as he made that run. So this is how he accelerated, this is how he braked, and this was sort of the impact in terms of the reduction on fuel. So we're looking at saving over $70 million per annum in fuel use just by changing the behaviours of the users. But the important piece we found there was that people want to see the data as being meaningful and being real rather than data for data's sake. And so we found a huge amount more traction with actually having real people's use of that data analysed against others, rather than just the computer says things can be improved and we can move a margin point. So that was a really valuable insight, and that's something that WSP particularly bring to that is we can elicit the data, we can put sensors up everything and around everything, and we've got narrowband IoT coming through, so you can actually get that data further and deeper into buildings and under the ground, etc. But without the correct analysis of that data in a meaningful way to the customers, it's just a pool of data sitting.
We're just on this journey right at the moment. So in December we had a meeting where we brought in all of the public and the private people who've got data around Sydney. So we had Transurban, we had the Port of, we had Sydney Ports, New South Wales Ports, we had the airport, we had Linfox, we had Uber, who we're publishing a congestion metric with now, which if you haven't seen it, it's on our website. Go and have a look, it'll be updated every twice a year. The amazing thing at the moment is because this is all new, people are quite happy to share their data. We went to Uber and we pitched up an idea of having some fairly defined zones and some good questions. They gave us access to their back of house to begin to run the metrics. At this meeting, everybody who came along had a pre-commitment that their data, de-identified, not commercially in confidence, but their data would be available. The question that we all had, which I couldn't argue, is what are we going to do with it and how do we put it all together?
And look, I'd agree from a Telstra perspective, we're happy to share the data as long as it's appropriately anonymised, so we're not actually exposing individuals' information, but it is a very sensitive area because obviously we need to be very clear around what the outcome that's been trying to be achieved from sharing that data information. So we do work with a number of groups around exposing appropriate data, and it's kind of in that challenge. You've got the three sections of data: the private stuff that we absolutely don't want to share, the stuff we'll share with trusted partners like WSP, and then the stuff we're happy to just make completely public, because you have to appropriately expose as much data to everybody as you can, because the creativity is much broader than just in this room. And so we're sort of going down that delicate balance, but as long as we're able to anonymise the data appropriately, then we're happy to expose that data based on the right outcomes being required from that data.
But before Christmas, I was in London, and we did a 2 days ideation around big data, and came up with kind of scenarios. And one idea was how could we, with all the information we get from buildings, let's say we took buildings and we say we are installing sensors in the buildings, and today when we look at it, we believe that the information that we capture from those sensors is not fully utilized. And one idea was, could we capture the data of all the buildings we're designing, getting all that information, and then use that data and sell the data to, for example, facility managers, to contractors, and create value out of the data. So at the end of the day, it's all a question of how do you take the data and create value that you can basically materialize and sell. And so that was an idea. So you could say, with facility managers, we have data that could help you basically do better preventive maintenance of your building, save energy. So there's a lot of interesting things that we could do with that.
I really see WSP's role as being make the data available, but also pull that data into meaningful sets so that people can be really creative on delivering those front-end experiences, applications, in-car experience, whatever.
And do something really cool with that data. So coming back to the Internet of Things, if we have got a bunch of bridges that have got sensors built into them and we're measuring stress and deterioration and rotation and heat and temperature changes and all of those things, we'll build up really, really high quality data sets quite quickly. And then there's an interesting challenge in, well, what's the role of engineering standards at that point? At the moment, our ASNZ standards are basically defining a common denominator that says you must meet this minimum requirement because that bridge fell down 50 years ago. If we're able to gather real data on real performance from real pieces of infrastructure, we're then in a position to say, actually, we don't need to meet that standard because we've proved over here that this thing's perfectly serviceable in this mode, and therefore that bridge can be lighter and quicker and cheaper and all the rest of it. Is there a legislative environment that allows those conversations to happen where we're using data-based design decisions and construction decisions rather than designing to the lowest common denominator, which is really the only option available to us at the moment. Not too distant future where the value of the data has a dollar value attached. So whether you're a water utility provider or whether you're a state road network or whether you're just New South Wales, if you've got that data, if you know how to analyse it, if you're able to say, this is where this asset is working, this is how we're gathering this data, this is how we're delivering a better service to our population, that can then sit on the balance sheet as an asset that has a value that says our data is great, it's better than everybody else's, we can attract investment because we can demonstrate to our supply chain where they're going to get value out of that investment, and we can back that up with our data. And so the New South Wales government data set sits on the balance sheet with a value of $22.5 billion that can then be borrowed against and used to fund better services for the population. So I think our role professional service providers is ultimately going to be to create the value out of that data, demonstrate the value out of that data, and then whether we own it or the state owns it or the water utility owns it or Macquarie owns it, at the point that you can put a dollar value on that data, then you've really cracked it, and that's a game changer for those clients.
I guess we don't want to rush to an answer as much as we want to rush to a framework of all of the... I mean, the cool stuff about technology is it tells us what's happening and it helps us understand what should happen better. And that means that we can help, for you guys, it means you can help your clients in the public sector or the private sector to better understand how they do things efficiently. You can actually begin to understand the core problem. And the government will usually come to you and say, we want to build a road, but actually what they're saying is we've got a transport problem here, and so it really expands the level of information. If you ask it the right questions, it allows you to understand the problem, it allows you to scenario test different solutions and really to come up with the best answer. And you guys are engineers, that's what you love, in your heart, most of you are engineers, and that's what you love to do. You love to answer hard questions and you love to do it with information. We don't want to forget all of the things we know about humanity and the way that, the fact that we all cluster together, that we live in cities, that we do all of these things, that we work in teams, and there's sort of a million things around team dynamics and so on. So just because something's possible doesn't mean that it's going to happen, because there's still gravity, there's still human behavioural, economic type things that you need to factor in, or observed behaviours, and all of the rest. I think the best way to think about technology is reducing the gap really between people who want things and people who supply things.